So if you don't close the neck and you don't dry and cure, you're going to have weight loss through the season. And obviously at the end of the day, that's money in the bank. It's every gram of moisture that you lose out of the product is money you don't have at the end of the season.
Welcome back to the Vegalogue podcast, a dialogue about the Australian vegetable industry from AUSVEG. I'm Tom Bicknell. Drying and curing onions properly is the key to a long life on the shelf and a satisfied customer. Onions need to cure properly to prevent moisture loss, decay, or loss of skins. Depending on their climate, varieties and infrastructure, onion growers around Australia do this in a number of ways. To understand the pros and cons of the various approaches, AUSVEG's Deborah Hill spoke with Brad Hicks, the after-sales and service manager at vegetable storage and handling company Tolsma Australia.
We're having a chat with Brad Hicks, who is the after-sales and service manager with Tolsma Australia. So welcome, Brad.
All right, thanks, Deborah. Thanks for inviting me along.
With onions, when you're curing and drying, once they're harvested, a lot, particularly in South Australia, would cure and dry the onions on the ground. They'll literally just pull them up and leave them. But that's not always possible, is it?
No. So I suppose field curing like that is good, and it's pretty universal practice for a lot of places around the world, and particularly where temperature difference between day and night is quite small, and also where you're not getting really high daytime temperatures. So I think the guys in South Australia will pretty much do that as it cools off, sort of around March, for that harvest, where they can get some curing done on the field before they box them up and bring them into store.
Does it matter what type of onion you use in terms of bringing them into store and how well they need to be cured and how long and all that kind of thing? Does the onion type make a difference?
Yeah. So, obviously the short day onions, they have a lot less dry matter, and they're a lot more temperamental. Growers try and get away from growing them just because they are so temperamental. Obviously any knocks during harvest or anything like that, they tend to bruise, they can break down easy. So I suppose the movement at this stage is trying to get away from those short and intermediate day onions and grow long day onions. They're a lot more durable and you can store them longer.
Harvesting starts when it comes out of the ground and that curing process happens, is when the tops start to dry and fall over. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Does that neck length, that portion above the bulb to where the leaves are cut off, does that make any difference into how long it needs to dry and cure and how effective it actually is?
Yeah, so if growers can keep a longer neck, it acts to help draw the moisture from the skin better. So what I mean by that is, like, I sort of make an analogy, if you put paper towel into a glass of water, you can see the paper towel, it draws the moisture up. So by leaving a longer neck on those onions, it tends to draw the moisture out and it will close the neck slowly. So the onions that have been sort of short-topped have got a tiny little neck on them. The onions tend to dry a bit slower, or they don't dry as well. That neck doesn't close over, that moisture's not drawn out. But they're also can be more susceptible to disease as well when those necks are cut short.
Right, and that can show up potentially in storage, can't it?
Yeah. So obviously it's like a cut in your skin. Something can get in. So if you leave that neck a little bit longer, disease is not able to enter, or it has more trouble entering, and you have better drying effect as well.
Dryness that is needed to be done is dependent on how wet the onion is when it comes out of the ground. So again, back to the Lockyer Valley, they've got quite a damp soil, if you like, so they tend to hand harvest, don't they?
Yeah, a lot of that's hand harvest, and they they can avoid damage, I suppose, that way as well. Machines are normally a bit harder on the product, but yeah, hand harvest is something that's done, but obviously there's a lot more manpower and a lot more resources go into it.
In that instance, then, the use of a curing and drying shed is far more important, I would have thought, than compared to the ground cured guys down in South Australia.
Yeah, for sure. So if you can dry and cure in a controlled environment, where you're bringing in air with less moisture, and you're running that over the product, than what's inside the room, you're going to get a much better drying effect. And you can also harvest when the onions are greener as well. So if you've got a really good drying facility, you can, if there's 4 inches of rain forecast, you can actually dig them, get them out of the ground, put them in boxes, and they might be 60% green, the necks on those. But if you've got the right drying system, you can actually dry those and cure those.
Can we take a step back? Why do we need to dry and cure an onion?
You need to dry and cure to close the neck. Okay, so if you close the neck of the onion, it acts like a seal. So it's sort of like like a kid's water balloon, I suppose. You tie the knot in the balloon and you keep the moisture inside. It's the same as the onion. So if you can dry and cure, close that neck, it seals it off. It stops any disease or anything entering, but it also creates a seal so that you're actually keeping the moisture in the onion. Now, obviously, if you're keeping moisture in the onion during the storage phase, when you're storing it at low temperatures, that's not escaping. So you're not getting the weight loss. So if you don't close the neck and you don't dry and cure, you're going to have weight loss through the season. You're going to have that moisture escape. And obviously, at the end of the day, that's money in the bank. It's every gram of moisture that you lose out of the product is money, I suppose, that you don't have at the end of you don't have at the end of the season. So in terms of storage, the drying and curing phase is absolutely the most important phase of the storage, just to make sure you're closing that neck, avoiding any disease and keeping the moisture in the product.
I realise this is a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but how long does curing typically take, and to what point do you stop curing?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So obviously the greener the product comes in, the longer it's going to take to cure. Air temperature, and we work on the grams of moisture in the air. So we work on, we calculate the air temperature, we calculate the relative humidity of that air, and from that we can work out the absolute moisture content of the air. So we work out how many grams per cubic metre of moisture in that air.
And by air, you mean the shed itself, not the external?
No, well, we measure the outside air, external to the shed, and we do the same inside. So we can work out the moisture differential between inside the shed and outside. So we will only bring in air at our systems that is drier, so with less moisture per cubic metre than what's inside the store. So our systems have hatches.
Well, otherwise you're adding to it, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of people look at humidity. Yes, that's really important, but what is more important is the absolute moisture content. Obviously, humidity is a relative measure where we want to know the absolute value. So we want to know how many grams per cubic metre of moisture in the outside air compared to inside air. So we will only open the hatches and allow outside air into the store if we know it is drier, it contains less grams of moisture per cubic metre.
Which will then in turn determine how long that takes to cure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, and also temperature. Obviously, if you can bring in warmer air expands, it can hold a lot more moisture. So, particularly in places around Victoria, sort of cooler climate places, a lot of our drying gets done at night and we use heaters. So we have gas heaters installed, and it's all automated. So if you can bring in cold outside air at night, cold air is dry, holds less moisture. But once you heat that up, it expands and it can hold more moisture. So if you bring in, 6 or 7 or 8 degree air from outside, it's going to be dry, holds less moisture. You bring it inside the store, you heat it up, it expands, it can hold a lot more. And then you get a really fast and efficient drying process.
Is that air then expelled out of the shed again?
Yeah. So what we will have is we'll have an inlet hatch. So it will open, and we'll have sort of fans sitting above. We'll blow air over the product, and it will suck it back through. But we also have outlet hatches at the top for the moisture and that warmer air to escape the shed.
We've talked a little bit now about how a shed actually works. Do you want to just run through what the key design elements are of a curing shed?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different systems. So you can have like an open space system where what I mean by an open space is that you have gaps between the bins stacked up back to back, and you just have airflow flowing around them. Okay, it flows over the top and it sucks it back through. There's another system which forces air through the product. So we have an airbag system, so it will blow air down a gap. I suppose we'll have an airbag at the end, and it stops that air from escaping, and then it forces it through the bins. So it's a forced air system. There's another system. We have a letterbox system as well. So similar concept, except it blasts air through the tine pocket holes. On the last row, you block those tine pocket holes, and then that forces air through the system. So a forced air system is ultimately more suited drying facility for onions. But in terms to answer your question, in shed design, the shed design for a letterbox system, you can't go very deep. So 10 bins is about the maximum depth you can go. With with an airbag system, you can go much deeper. So you can have longer, narrower shed design.
Because it will double back on itself anyway, won't it, to a degree?
Yeah. So with the airbag, you might have 20 bins. You might go up to 25 bins deep in an airbag system, where a letterbox system, you could only have, you can only have about 10 bins, just because you can't get the airflow through those tine pockets. And our open space system is probably what we're seeing, or what we have most of installed in Australia at the moment. Just in terms, they still do a really good job, but it's a really simple, cost-effective install. The other systems are a bit more complex in the installation.
When you talk about bins, are we talking about those massive crates where they're harvested straight into the bin and then into the shed? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, into the wooden bins. So they're either they come in all different dimensions, shapes and sizes, depending on what farms.
Do the onions need to be a single layer, or can they be stacked, 10 deep in the bin?
No, just piled in the bin. A bin might hold up to sort of 950 kilograms. So they are, they're all stacked into the bins. So single layered process is going to take up huge amounts of shed space and room. So I suppose your shed space is prime space, which you need to make sure that you've got plenty of.
Within those bins, though, I would imagine the middle ones that are surrounded on all sides by other onions, do you need to rotate them through the bin so that, internal becomes external to the bin?
No, well, that's why we're sort of installing more forced air systems, because we work on a static pressure of 250 pascal. So it's a pressurized system where it actually forces air through the bins. So obviously, the outside ones are going to cure a bit quicker. But because we've got forced air, or we've worked on that static pressure, it's even in our open space systems, it is still you've got a pressurised system where it's forcing air through those bins. It's going through the tine pockets, it's going through the gaps in the slats, and it's still getting to the middle of those onions.
About temperature and relative humidity, I assume there's all sorts of measuring devices within the shed that can monitor all of those. Are they equally as important as the airflow that's going through?
Yeah, for sure. To be able to control, you need to measure. So obviously, if you don't know your readings, you don't know your temperature, you don't know your humidity, there's no way that you can control the system. So yeah, they're ultra important. So particularly, like I spoke about before, measuring the outside humidity, the outside air temperature, comparing it to what's in store, and then the system can automate whether it brings in outside air or it might say, hang on a minute, no, it's a really humid day. It's low temperature or high temperature, humid day. The air outside holds a lot more moisture than what's inside. So if we bring that air in, we're actually going to make our product wet. So yeah, measurement is key.
One would assume then that it can be monitored remotely then?
Yeah, yep, sure. So each system comes with a computer. Sit it close to the store or in an office, you can see it. But we also have a web link as well, so that you can download, check into the store. You can change all the settings, see what's going off, or see what's going on in the store, and then make changes to your settings.
What sort of measurement systems do you use then? And I'm thinking in this instance, the relative humidity to temperature and what the cubic grams of water might be. There's a lot of physics in all of this. So what sort of mathematical equations are going on behind this to get that optimum?
Yeah, so our systems are based on the Moyer principle, spelled MOLLIER.
Is there an optimum sweet spot, if you like, between temperature outside, humidity, and the amount of moisture in the shed inside to get the best curing rates?
Obviously, if you've got a larger differential, so say for instance that outside air that you bring in has a moisture content of say 3.6 grams and inside has inside might have 10, it's more. So obviously that larger that differential, the drier the air that you bring in, the faster you're going to cure. And if that temperature, we tend to dry around the 20 degree mark because we want to avoid botrytis forming. So conditions for botrytis are really prevalent, and they love conditions between the range of about 22 and sort of 27 degrees. So we want to try and avoid product temperature between those ranges. So we will try and dry for as close to 20 degrees as possible. If it's really hot outside, we get those conditions in South Australia sometimes where we get, a couple of weeks of, high 30s. We will actually dry above 28. So we'll try and skip through that 22 to 27 range, and we will
push it past the botrytis.
Yeah, push it through that as quick as we can, and we'll dry at 28 degrees. And obviously, if you're drying at 28 degrees, you're going to dry a lot faster than you are at 20 degrees.
Is there a risk of drying too quickly?
There is, but we don't generally see it. I suppose if you dry too quickly, that neck can close too fast before it's actually drawn the moisture out of it properly. That's the risk. And if that neck closes over before the outer shells are completely dry, that's when we can have some breakdown and some mold and things building up.
For a grower who has realised, that a curing shed is the way to go now, and for whatever reason, what would be the key considerations before they go building a shed?
Well, at the end of the day, it comes down to quality and how long you want to store it for. So like I was discussing before, with some growers will have early onions, so they will be the short day onions. and they'll try and have those produced sort of November, December to try and meet market demand. But a lot of growers now are moving away from that because they can store longer. So considerations are definitely the quality of the product, but obviously it all comes down to dollars and cents. How much is it going to cost to put in a store? What space do I need? What return on investment am I going to get? So obviously out of season, your onions, particularly around that November, December mark, that's generally where they're getting higher prices. And growers need to be able to justify their output, I suppose, if they're going to put in a new storage facility, and who they're storing for as well. So depending on where they supply, the big supermarket chains, they expect quality, and they expect quality all year round. So a lot of those guys have to meet the market expectation from those big companies, and they're pretty hard on quality. And if the quality's not there, well, they're getting deductions and things like that, and they might be losing contracts. So I suppose quality of the product has a huge demand on investment. A lot of growers will store in open sheds, like we discussed before, and that's quite a cost-effective way to store. Just for an open shed, just the roof, get the wind blowing through. You're getting the drying and curing effect, but it's sort of a short to a mid-term storage range. I suppose the problems we're seeing and why people are reaching out to us is because they are not getting the quality, or they're getting knocked back by the supermarkets, or they're having weight loss. So I think it's a good short-term storage solution, but I suppose the long-term, those weight losses are quite substantial. So what is seen, because you're not controlling the environment, you've got a daytime temperature of, say, it might get up to 17, 18, 19 degrees during the day, and it might get down to, close to zero at night. So you're getting those warm onions, cold air sitting on it, you're getting condensation. So there's condensation sitting on the onions, and the skin absorbs that. So it will absorb the condensation, then it will dry, absorb it, dry. So it's sort of expanding and contracting all the time. And sort of a lot of the problem that come from that are naked onions. So they lose the skin just because of that contraction all the time.
So even from a storage handling point of view, losing that outer skin, those outer layers, is risky, because you risk damaging the bulb itself then, don't you, with handling?
Yeah, that's right. And the other part of it is as well as the supermarkets don't like naked onions either. They like them with a nice firm shell for the same reason. Yeah, longer shelf life. It's a protective layer. And if that protective layer goes, well, there's nothing keeping that onion safe, and the shelf life is going to be a lot less. I suppose if I can leave growers with one message, it's got to be, you need to be able to measure, you need to be able to control, and you've got to look at that moisture differential. So humidity is important, but what's more important is the absolute moisture value. How many grams per cubic metre of moisture is in that air? So ultimately that's the most important part of storage, and being able to control the inside environment and dry and cure.
Well, thank you, Brad, for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to learn more about the art of curing onions. So thank you again.
No worries. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.
You've been listening to the Vegalogue podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and give the podcast a rating and review to help others find us. Vegalogue is produced by AUSVEG, the peak industry body for Australian vegetable growers. You can find more news and information from AUSVEG at ausveg.com.au, on our social media channels, or in Australian Grower magazine. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned that the best way to avoid moisture loss in onions is to make sure there's no leaks.